We're partnering with the Boeing brand. That's the brand that I'm doing business with. That's a brand that I've worked with for years. And it's a brand that I trust.
Willie Walsh there, talking about his trust in the Boeing brand after he created what was the biggest and perhaps most surprising story at Le Bourget this week. His IAG group signing a letter of intent for 200 Boeing 737 MAX jets late on Tuesday. I'm Lewis Harper, the managing editor of Airline Business, and I'm joined by executive editor Graham Dunn for our third and final Paris Air Show 2019 podcast. This one is a bit different. We're back in London rather than being on site at Le Bourget. A big advantage for us and for you, the listener, is we were able to talk about all the significant developments from Wednesday and look back at the show as a whole without the distraction of fighter jets flying overhead. I mean, that's unless things have got really bad with Brexit since we've been away. But just a health warning before we start, the show is still happening on Thursday, so we can't promise to cover all of the latest stories, and we're not in our usual studio, so apologies if the sound quality still isn't quite up to scratch. So hi Graham, how are you feeling after your nice relaxing city break in Paris?
It's very much so, a lovely chance to city break. Actually, there was a tumultuous storm as we left. Okay. We were heading into the Eurostar there, but I believe some of my colleagues got absolutely drenched.
Oh dear, okay.
But that's by the by. It was, you know, after the fireworks of Willie Walsh and the MAX order, you know, there was a lot. You know, it got people thinking almost anything was possible on the following day on the Wednesday, and it was an interesting day without ever really catching fire. There was plenty to talk about, plenty of announcements.
So the obviously XLR had been a bit overshadowed, I think, obviously as you say, by the IAG announcement, but some interesting things around that though. We had Indigo Partners on Wednesday announcing an order for 50. As with a lot of these things, I think there was a mixture of 32 new orders, 18 conversions from previous placed.
Yeah, pretty much all these, and that's been at all the air shows. Whenever there's there's almost always a picture of something, a common theme that goes between them. A lot of the Airbus orders, a lot of the announcements were mixes of almost all the new customers have taken a batch of new aircraft, but they've also converted some of their existing orders. Especially those airlines with a big backlog there, and you saw quite a lot of the numbers. You know, it's almost a half and half when you look at the kind of announcement levels you're hearing for new aircraft for the XLR. Half of those would be new business, and about half would be conversions of existing orders. But that doesn't take away that there's definitely a market and a model, a market and a niche or a business model for that aircraft.
Yeah, and the Frontier, obviously one of the Indigo airlines, their CEO Barry Biffle specifically talked about the XLR possibly opening up Hawaiian flights, but beyond that, looking into South America and even Europe. And we've seen this before, haven't we, with a new narrow-body aircraft type kind of opening up those new markets. And I think that's where most of the excitement is around the XLR.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think especially in that I mean, it's with almost all types, obviously, and you know, there's kind of new range and there's extra range payloads. It just makes certain routes more attractive, and that's certainly what you're seeing with the XLR. In the same way as the MAX and the Neo, when they first arrived, kind of opened up these. Particularly, the market that's very obvious is that East Coast US to Western Europe to sort of lower density routes, lower density seating routes.
Yeah, dare I say, it's another opportunity for us to write an article on whether this is the moment for low cost long haul. We also saw Qantas placing an order for 36. Majority of them, again, as we were saying before, they were conversions, but 10 fresh orders. I think Alan Joyce said that they would. It was a group order, so they could be mixed between Qantas and Jetstar.
Yeah.
So again, another example where we may see a low-cost carrier using the new variant to fly new routes. And then towards the end of Wednesday, we saw American Airlines with a commitment for 50 of the XLRs.
And American, that had been touted beforehand. There was a lot of talk about that. Ned Russell, who we had on the podcast earlier in the week, he was certainly expecting that order. And you know, it's another significant customer for the type.
Yeah, and American's president Robert Eisen said it'd give them the opportunity to do things we haven't thought of in the past. So exciting times, an American. Just on Airbus as well, Thursday morning, we saw another A220 order from the lesser NAC, so they trickled through as well.
They did, and I think that's a story that's a little lost, you know. Even within, obviously, a lot of stuff's lost against the Max order, but even within Airbus, you know, most of the business and most of the stories and headlines have been around the A321XLR. But the A220, which is of course the old C series program, which they acquired, took basically control a year ago. Now, when they did that, there were a couple of landmark kind of banner orders they had there. There's big commitments from JetBlue and from David Neeleman for this transatlantic startup, which everyone still calls Moxie Airlines, even though apparently it's not going to be Moxie.
It never was.
It never was, and it's really. It's very difficult, I can tell you. I mean, this is a problem for journalists rather than everyone else in the world. But trying to headline David Neeleman's startup Moxie that isn't Moxie in headlines is really quite painful.
And we've got a 60-character limit, so
that's very difficult.
Yeah.
So, you know, we had that, and then you find that there'd been actually very little business for that type until this show. But actually, that's 75 aircraft that from Delta with the follow-on order, but to get 50 from Air Lease, to get another 20 from Lesser for NAC. So that's, you know, that's good business for that aircraft.
And looking at the smaller airframers, you went along to an ATR press conference.
Yeah, I did a couple of the ATR ones, and actually it was a very. There's usually one of the regional manufacturers that has an interesting or big show with, you know, a lot of. You're not talking the same kind of volumes for these aircraft. Last year it was Embraer, and Embraer did some business at the show with KLM right at the end. But for ATR. They'd already announced like a very significant deal with NAC again, which is for like 100 aircraft. It was entertainingly headlined as being up to 105 plus or 100 plus. It was very confusing, but you know, that's a significant deal for them. And then yesterday they also announced a short takeoff and landing version of the ATR 42-600, and that's a real niche market. And they
secured a couple of, didn't they, of orders. Launch was Elix, Aviation Capital, and Air Tahiti.
Yeah, and Elix is very interesting. They're the launch customer. When it's launched, it's not actually. It's a weird process whereby they're able to go and tout for business. Once they get enough business, they'll formally launch it, which they hope to do at the end of the year. And Elix is already a niche turboprop lessor. It's operating in that niche market, and then it sees a niche within a niche, which is for these, you know, really restricted airports and runways that you can land. It's 800 meters is where they're targeting there, and you know that's it. That's interesting. You know, there's a real market or real opportunities for specific airline operations in basically hard to get to places, and they see the chance for that. So this is not, you know, it's permanently going to be a niche bit, but you know, that's more good news for ATR.
Yeah, talking about aircraft kind of aimed at those smaller kind of niche markets. Going into the show, we knew Mitsubishi were overhauling the MRJ program and rebranding it under the name SpaceJet. Now, I learned something during the show that my instant reaction is SpaceJet. Are they talking about outer space? I mean, that's not very reassuring for passengers, is it? But no, of course, they're talking a lot about how spacious the jet is inside. I guess that's the kind of marketing message. At the same time, we've got a rather, I think, slightly confusing rebranding where the MRJ 90 has been rebranded the SpaceJet M90, but the newer version, which is smaller, the 76-seat version, is branded the M100. So a challenge for journalists and sub-editors alike, I think, in the future on that one. But actually, at the show, There's fairly minimal activity, wasn't there? There was an order or commitment towards the end.
There was a lot of interest about. They obviously had this rebranding. There was detail around customer. They did make a customer announcement, but of a sort, it's probably the loosest customer announcement that was made. It was a kind of commitment to work with a North American customer. So that there's lots of potential there, but to what extent? I think there's a lot more to do to make that happen. And there was talk beforehand about the CRJ program, which they're looking at acquiring, but there wasn't any news on that either. So quiet show for them ultimately. But they got a lot of space in the magazines and newspapers and website ahead of the show.
Yeah, and that's it. And on the 76-seat version, obviously that is aimed at the US scope clause requirements. So essentially, the agreements between airlines and unions that limit the size of aircraft that can be flown by those regional affiliates. The idea being that unions are concerned the airlines will kind of outsource more than the regional activity. But yeah.
And that's why it's significant that it's a North American customer. So they'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and on the CRJ, obviously there's a theory that really what it wants is that network of MRO and facilities and everything for the launch ultimately of the space jet. Thanks, Graham. In the second part, we'll move on just to talk about our thoughts on the show as a whole. So welcome back. So looking at the show as a whole, I mean, we kind of I think agree that surprisingly, Boeing kind of stole the show in a way with the IAG order. We didn't expect that, and if you listen to our Day 2 podcast, you can hear us saying that. When 10 minutes later on the same podcast, we're announcing that IAG order. But in terms of what this means for Boeing, is it the return of the MAX, as the headline should have been in our daily for this news, or is there's still a way to go, isn't there?
There's a lot of ground still to cover, not least getting that aircraft flying airborne again. Yeah. But it is such a statement order, and it's such a statement. And it's not, I was going to say I don't find it surprising. Obviously, I found it surprising, but I don't find it surprising that Willie Walsh would be the one to do this. I think for the show, when we're talking about it, wondered would there be an airline brave enough to go out there and say, when there's an aircraft that's grounded and put in a statement order. We probably thought Michael O'Leary would be the type of person who would do that, and obviously he's an existing MAX customer. For IAG, which isn't a MAX customer, to go and make this a statement order, it's interesting. Obviously, they, I'm sure, got a very good deal for this. And that's what most of the questions have been around how good a deal did they get for it. But also, I remember when the ash cloud happened, and Willie Walsh was on flights showing that you could fly. There is something about him that wants to prove. If he thinks something is safe or right or whatever, he almost goes out of his way to demonstrate.
Talk, wasn't there, that he had flown the MAX simulator before this deal and recovered the aircraft from an MCAS situation and felt comfortable that way. So yes, certainly. And on the MAX branding, there's kind of, even before this announcement, there were rumours that Boeing was going to move away from that branding. And then when IAG put out its stock exchange statement, it didn't mention the MAX by name. Now, of course, what it did use was the official designation of the aircraft, which doesn't include the word MAX. So I don't think we can draw too much from that necessarily. And since then, I think some Boeing executives have said that they're not considering dropping the MAX name. So
I think this story's going to run, and Boeing ultimately might decide it has. It's going to run. It might decide it because people are going to keep asking about. There are so many questions about that return to service and how they handle that, and that public perception when they do that. That will have to be something they consider, and they've been open about that.
My take would be, I would be very surprised if they're their PR push on this would be to subtly drop the name, because if they do that, they're seen to be kind of trying to hide that these are MAX aircraft by kind of just suddenly referring to it slightly differently. I don't think the optics on that are very good, given why we're in this position. So it might be wrong, but that would kind of seems an unlikely PR plan for the brand. And I think, as we said, there's so far to go with the MAX. It might be easy to get excited about what's happened with IAG, but as you say, it's not flying yet. And really, given the unprecedented nature of what's happened with the aircraft, you really aren't going to be able to tell until it's back in service whether there really will be like a customer confidence in flying it.
Yeah, and in terms of both from the customer side and also from airlines, whether they are ready to jump in as well. I mean, obviously the question we have as journalists, and even as the show has broadly wrapped up, it is still going on. It is not beyond the realms that Boeing will have another announcement. But I think when you look at the context of the show, Boeing, we like to create battles that aren't necessarily there, and has Airbus won the show? Has Boeing won the show? I think it's probably Boeing. Is it Boeing won the Airbus won the battle and Boeing won the war, or something like that? Around because the order dominated it. In that MAX order, 200 aircraft. Boeing's booked, I don't know, the last time I looked, it was about 230 odd order commitments there. So it's really largely just that BA order. And Airbus has booked far more business over the show as things stand. Yet the BA and the MAX aircraft is probably the order people will be talking about in years to come.
That's it. And obviously the start of the show we talked about on Monday how we were slightly surprised to see the Virgin Atlantic order with Airbus. But generally, talking about Airbus's show, it has been very narrow body focused. We haven't really seen any great wide body activity. No A350 orders, for example.
No, there's been none of those. But there was some interesting also. The A330neo, the Cebu Pacific order is really interesting in terms of the number of people they plan to seat in that.
Yeah, that's 460, I think.
Yeah, so that's eye-catching and interesting in terms of bits and pieces. But it was definitely around the narrow body section, the narrow body side of things. But at least from a journalistic perspective, so there was a new type to talk about, and they got some stuff. A newish type, the A220. So, and
I think their orders at the show have brought them into net positive territory for the year, which is not easy.
Well, this was very unusual that going into it, both Airbus and Boeing were in this bizarre thing where neither had done much business for a variety of different reasons, and both had suffered. Boeing in particular had just suffered from Jet Airways grounding and future bookings that they've made being taken out of the backlog. So it's nice to see some positive territory returning when of course those orders are finally put into the backlog. People ask quite how many orders were there at the show. It's really quite difficult to tell how many, because it depends what you call an order. Is it a firm order, or is it an intention to order, and then how soon do those orders come together? But once they are in the books, however long that takes, there is positive territory.
And obviously, one thing that stood out by its absence at this show was the A380 has been kind of a mainstay at the big air shows in recent years. I couldn't help but notice there was an A380 sort of sitting rather forlornly over the other side of the airfield at the Bourget. But yeah, a bit strange not to have that, because whatever you think about the A380, that kind of flying display was always a bit of a highlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Away from the kind of airframers themselves, in terms of the customer mix we saw at the show, there was an interesting
there were quite a few dynamics there. I think what you've seen over recent years, particularly when there's quite a splurge of orders, a lot of order activity, customers are making very big commitments. So we got used to, whether it's AirAsia or Indigo, whatever, ordering 150, 300 with options, these massive orders, and you had loads historically have ordered 100 plus, filling those order books over the next 5-10 years, whatever it is. On this one, there's been a lot of topping up orders. A lot of airlines have added another 50 here, another 30 here, lessors 50-30. There's only, IAG is the standout, 200 plus. Air Lease has ended up with 100 plus, and lessors are usually quite busy in that environment. But beyond that, you're looking at Saudi, Korean, with orders in that sort of 50-60 magnitude, even with options. So so I thought that was interesting. And last year we had undisclosed customer, our favourite thing. So basically, almost half. It felt like half the orders announced, and I always found it challenging to write that they've announced an order for an unannounced customer, because it's not quite the same thing. But there was a lot of orders for undisclosed customers, and that was probably we still don't know because they were unannounced. Probably to do with China and the background of the start of the China-US trade war. That the optics again probably didn't look too great to have Chinese carriers announcing those orders. Plus, also historically, a lot of those Chinese orders have been formalised as to exactly where they're going or revealed closer to delivery. It's not that unusual. This year, virtually none so far. ATR announced a few, or unannounced a few, however you view it. But interestingly, also, I don't think there's been a Chinese airline order at all. There's in fact, very little Chinese engine order business. If I think had something, and compared to recent years where so many orders have come from China, that's a different, that is definitely different. Whether that's to do with the trade war or whether that was just how things landed, whether they got enough for now. But it's definitely, I thought, interesting.
Yeah, you think, there could be a lot going on behind the scenes, as you say, but very much the optics of it would be, I guess, particularly difficult with, given how much that US-China trade war has ramped up, certainly in recent months. And another kind of key theme that I think people wanted to be a theme anyway at the air show is sustainability, but it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you don't really get a sense of a single pathway, and that's because there's not. But I almost find it quite confusing and slightly overwhelming hearing lots of different people telling you they've got the answer, but when you actually drill down into the detail, you don't really get the sense that anyone's really sure.
It's really, it's definitely. And we were talking about it when we were talking about IATA in an earlier podcast, that the industry knows that it has to address sustainability, and I think people have always talked about it, and there's action, there's definitely stuff going on. It's at the top level of things. You had chief executives, you had proper kind of grown-ups trying to dedicating time, proper initiatives. It's definitely on the radar. The challenge is to take words into action, to accelerate it, I guess.
Yeah, you get this curious mix, because for some manufacturers and airlines, they will try and suggest that they're in some way superior because in a lot of cases they've accidentally done something that means they are more environmentally friendly in double quotes. It may be just that the routes they tend to fly, and the fact that they happen to have newer aircraft means that they can say, we're much more environmentally friendly than other airlines. But that, I don't think those kind of boasts or arguments are going to take the industry very far.
It's definitely, they are definitely greener than flying older aircraft, but
when you think, again, we talked about, as you say, in the IATA podcast, the inconvenient truth on this is there is, emissions are going up, even though these kind of more efficient aircraft are coming into service, just because of the sheer volume of aircraft coming into fleet. So, and when you look at electric aircraft, for example, things like that, it's still very much the case that there's no way, no one's suggesting that we're even close to being able to fly 200 people in an electric aircraft on a medium long haul route, whatever, even on a short haul route. It's so far off that. But maybe this is all just it's part of a longer term process. I think we can definitely see that airlines manufacturers just can't ignore it anymore, and they can't just pay a lip service. It's got to be more to it.
I think there's genuinely on the horizon. They genuinely know they need to deal with it, and they're genuinely trying to do stuff. But it's such a long term challenge to sort of industrialise this kind of thing. And as we talked about before, tackling environmental issues, that's not straightforward. There's not necessarily a silver bullet. You can improve on carbon emissions somewhere, and there's other implications in going electric and so forth. So nothing is straightforward.
That's it. The fact is the headlines from the show are big orders for jets that are releasing significant emissions into the atmosphere. So as long as that's the story, there's going to be a lot of work to do to kind of turn around the narrative on commercial aviation, I think. So the show's not actually quite over yet, so you never know. But while we're speaking now, kind of around Thursday lunchtime, we may be missing another huge surprise order somewhere, maybe not. But that's it really from our coverage from Paris. Obviously, you can follow all of the news and analysis from the show at flightglobal.com.
And if you can go to flightglobal.com/Paris.
You can try that.
You can try that, and that will take you to a dedicated stream of all the best of our Paris coverage, I think we'd say.
That's right. And so we'll be back to the kind of normal airline business podcast, hopefully, in the near future when the next issue comes out. And we've obviously got the Airline Strategy Awards and things coming up as well, where we hope to offer some coverage of that via this medium, hopefully. So, but in the meantime, thank you, Graham. And
thank you, Lewis, for all your hard work.
No, thanks. And we hope you enjoyed our slightly different approach to covering the Paris Air Show, and we'll speak to you soon.